Morning rose over New York in a slow haze of steel and glass. The city didn't wake so much as it shifted, one heartbeat rolling into another, taxis flashing like veins of light along Fifth Avenue. Somewhere high above it all, in a penthouse that touched the clouds, Adrian Morello poured his first espresso and watched the skyline burn gold. From the street, no one could tell what his empire was built on. His name appeared in magazines beside headlines about real estate, technology, philanthropy. But beneath that polish ran the real foundation, a network of favors, debts, and loyalties that had kept his family's shadow business alive for 3 generations. And at the center of that world, silent and constant, was Elena Morello, the woman everyone envied and almost no one understood. She moved through the apartment like the calm that followed a storm. Her mornings were ritual. Open the curtains, water the orchids, lay out Adrian's tie. She never hurried. Silence followed her like perfume. In that silence, she hid the truth, a truth that could unravel everything Adrian had built if it ever reached the wrong ears. 3 years earlier, she had found the files, documents buried in a locked server that traced money from Adrian's corporations to shell companies she recognized from old FBI cases. She hadn't gone looking for them. She had only wanted to organize his archives for a charity audit. But what she discovered made her blood turn to glass. She could have gone to the authorities then. She could have walked away, taken the small fortune in her own name, and disappeared. Instead, she closed the laptop, deleted her search history, and told no one, and not even Adrian, because she knew what silence could buy: time. And time was the only currency that could keep him alive. That morning he came in behind her, shirt half-buttoned, the smell of espresso trailing him. He kissed her temple, thanked her for the tie, and talked about a meeting downtown. She nodded, listening, eyes following the lines of his face. To anyone else, it was a picture of domestic ease, the powerful husband and the loyal wife. To her, it was a balance of glass. Every move, every smile, every glance at his phone told her how close they were to the edge. And lately, he had been distracted. Longer nights at the office, guarded calls, a kind of tension that bled through the charm. When he left, she sat in the quiet kitchen and stared at the city sprawling below. Somewhere in that sprawl, a man named Vincent Calder, one of Adrian's oldest allies, was waiting for a signal that might mean life or ruin for the Morellos. Elena knew because she'd intercepted a message meant for Adrian 2 nights before. She hadn't told him that either. By noon, she was downtown, slipping into the anonymous hum of Manhattan. She worked as curator at a small art foundation, her own creation, funded by her husband's legitimate money. The gallery gave her purpose, but it was also her refuge. Among canvases and quiet halls, no one asked questions that mattered. That afternoon, a courier dropped off a package. No return label. Inside was a single photograph, a warehouse by the Hudson, with a date and time scribbled on the back. Her pulse quickened. She knew the handwriting. It belonged to Thomas Gray, Adrian's former lawyer, a man who'd vanished 2 years ago after rumors of betrayal. If he was alive and reaching out to her now, something was coming. She slipped the photo into her coat pocket, locked the gallery, and stepped into the cold wind. The city roared around her, unaware that one woman's secret was about to shake its underworld. That night the penthouse glowed warm, soft jazz curling through the rooms. Adrian sat on the balcony with a glass of bourbon, his phone lighting up with encrypted messages. Elena watched him from the doorway, the same way she had watched storms roll across the ocean as a child, knowing they could be beautiful and deadly all at once. When he finally looked up, his smile was tired. She crossed to him, set her hand on his shoulder. He covered it with his own, thumb tracing her ring. For a moment the world seemed simple again. 2 people who had once fallen in love in Florence, long before power made everything complicated. But her mind kept drifting to the photo in her coat, and the time written on its back. Friday, 11 p.m. Friday came fast. The meeting she couldn't tell him about pulsed in her thoughts through every minute of the day. When Adrian left for an investor dinner, she changed into dark jeans and a coat, tied her hair back, and drove to the Hudson. The warehouse was empty except for dust and echoes. The river beyond it was a sheet of black glass. For a while she thought it was a trap. Then a voice rose from the shadows. Elena. Thomas Gray stepped forward, older, thinner, a scar running across his jaw. He looked like a man who had lived in fear for too long. He handed her a flash drive. Everything they need to destroy him, he said quietly. The Bureau's been waiting for this. Her throat tightened. Why give it to me? Because you're the only one who can choose whether he burns or walks free. She took the drive. The cold metal felt heavier than any weapon. Thomas turned away. If they don't get proof soon, others will come for him. Worse men than me. Then he disappeared into the dark. Driving home, her hands trembled on the wheel. The city lights blurred through tears she didn't notice until they fell onto the drive's surface. She had carried silence for 3 years. Now it sat beside her in the passenger seat, whispering choices she didn't want to make. By the time she reached the apartment, it was past midnight. Adrian wasn't home yet. She walked to his office, stared at the safe behind the bookshelf, and slid the flash drive inside without opening it for the first time. Her silence felt like mercy and punishment in the same breath. 2 days later, everything began to crack. Adrian's name surfaced in whispers across the news. A leaked investigation, a senator asking questions about offshore accounts. He came home late, eyes darker than she'd ever seen them. He didn't ask if she knew anything. She didn't offer comfort or denial. Only silence, steady, careful, unbroken. That night she stood at the window long after he'd fallen asleep, watching the city flicker like a dying flame. Somewhere below, the truth waited. Somewhere, someone would open that safe. And when they did, the world would either end or begin again. For now, she chose to say nothing. Morning light broke through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse overlooking the East River. New York was awake, restless taxis below, steam rising from vents, the hum of life returning to the streets. Inside, the air was quieter than it should have been. Too quiet for a home that once carried laughter and the faint hum of jazz in the evenings. Amara sat by the window in her silk robe, a cup of untouched coffee cooling in her hands. The city looked golden from up here, yet she felt the coldness of distance, not from the glass, but from the man still asleep behind her, Leonardo Vance, powerful, calculating, feared in every corner of the business world. A man who could move the market with one call, silence an enemy with one favor. Yet, in his empire of steel and glass, his wife's silence was the only thing he couldn't control. He stirred in bed, eyes opening slowly, voice heavy with sleep. You're up early again. She turned, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Couldn't sleep. The truth was deeper. Sleep had been impossible ever since she'd found the documents, the ledgers that hid the truth behind the Vance fortune. She knew what those numbers meant. Hidden accounts, offshore transfers, and something else, a name that should never have been there. Her father's. He had been declared bankrupt years ago, his company crushed by a rival merger led by Leonardo himself. Amara had buried that grief, the betrayal, the suspicion, until the night she found proof that her husband was the architect of her family's ruin. But she said nothing, because she loved him, because she saw the man beneath the empire, tired, haunted, desperate to keep control. She rose and walked toward the kitchen, her footsteps soft on the marble floor. Leonardo watched her move, studying her with the same quiet intensity he gave to negotiations. Something about her calm unsettled him. The silence between them wasn't peace. It was tension, thick enough to cut through. He had secrets of his own. He knew what she might have seen that night. The drawer he forgot to lock, the call he didn't end fast enough. But he also knew that confronting her could destroy the fragile thread keeping their marriage alive. They danced around truth. Two souls orbiting a lie, each protecting the other from collapse. Later that day, the boardroom was chaos. News had leaked a small scandal about a shell company in Zurich. Nothing major, but enough to make investors uneasy. Leonardo handled it with calm precision, his voice cutting through panic like a blade. Yet as he looked through the glass walls of the conference room, he saw her image reflected in the opposite building, Amara at home, on the balcony. her robe fluttering in the wind, her face unreadable. And for the first time, he wondered if the leak had come from inside. That night, he returned home later than usual. She was waiting, dinner untouched, candles burning down to stubs. The silence greeted him first, followed by her calm voice. "You should eat something." "I already did," he replied. Loosening his tie, she nodded, her gaze steady. "Busy day." "The usual." She wanted to scream. The usual. As if betrayal was routine, as if corruption could be filed under business as usual. But her lips didn't move. Her silence was her weapon, and her punishment. He poured himself a drink and stood beside her, watching the skyline. For a moment, their shoulders brushed. It was accidental, yet it lingered. "I don't know what's happening between us anymore," he said quietly. Her voice trembled when she answered. "Maybe nothing is happening anymore. Maybe that's the problem." He turned to face her, and for the first time in months, she saw something raw in his eyes. Not anger, not suspicion, but fear. The kind of fear that only comes when a man realizes he could lose everything that ever mattered. The phone rang. He ignored it. It rang again. Then again. He answered finally, his face tightening as he listened. When he hung up, his voice was low, sharp. "There's been a breach. Someone accessed private accounts." Her pulse quickened. "You think it's me?" He didn't answer. That was enough. She walked past him, whispering, "If I wanted to destroy you, Leonardo, I would have done it the night I found the truth." The glass door closed behind her, leaving him frozen, guilt gnawing through the armor he'd built his whole life. Outside, the night wind cut across her face as she stood on the terrace. She closed her eyes. In the city of endless noise, she found her only peace in silence, because sometimes silence isn't weakness. It's the last act of love. Autumn arrived quietly over New York. Leaves burned gold along the park avenues, and the air tasted of rain and fading warmth. Inside the Vance penthouse, time had become something that no longer moved forward. It only circled the same silence, the same unspoken truths. Amara spent most days working on her art again. The sketchbooks that once filled their home with life, now scattered like ghosts of the woman she used to be. Her hands trembled whenever she drew him, not as a husband, but as a man she no longer recognized. A man built from ambition and lies, yet still capable of touching her heart with a single glance. Leonardo buried himself in damage control. The scandal he thought he'd contained had begun to spread. Reports surfaced of missing funds, whistleblowers, quiet investigations. Every day the circle tightened, and every night he came home later, carrying the weight of his empire on his shoulders. Still, he found her awake, always by the window, wrapped in quiet that cut deeper than any accusation point. One evening, as the first snow of the season drifted outside, she turned to him and asked the question she'd been avoiding for months. "Would you tell me if everything was falling apart?" He paused, the answer caught in his throat. "I'd fix it before you needed to know." That was who he was, the fixer, the savior, the man who couldn't admit he needed saving. The next morning, Leonardo's world began to collapse. Federal agents raided one of his subsidiaries. A board member resigned. His lawyer warned him that an indictment was possible. And through it all, Amara stood beside him, silent, graceful, unreadable. Her calm unsettled even his most trusted men. They whispered that she knew more than she should. He confronted her finally, in the dim light of their bedroom. "Did you do this?" he asked, voice low, dangerous. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes glistening. "If you believe that, then you've already lost more than money." He hated how her words pierced him. Clean, precise, true. He wanted to demand answers, to search her things, to shout. But instead, he sank into the nearest chair, his head in his hands. She watched him crumble, and her heart broke all over again. That night, while he slept, she opened her laptop. The files she'd hidden months ago, the ledgers, the transfers, the proof that could dismantle his empire, all lay before her. She hovered over the button that would send them to the authorities. Her father's name flashed on the screen. Justice was only one click away, but justice meant destroying him, and she couldn't. She closed the laptop, tears staining the keyboard. The next morning, Leonardo found her asleep on the couch, the faint glow of the screen still on. He saw the documents and understood everything. She could have ruined him. She hadn't. Something broke inside him then, but it wasn't anger. It was the heavy, suffocating weight of remorse. He began to change, quietly at first. Meetings canceled, calls unanswered. He spent more time at home, watching her paint, sitting beside her without words. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply tried to become the man she once believed he was. Winter deepened. Snow covered the city, like silence made visible. They took long walks together in Central Park, saying little. It wasn't reconciliation. Not yet, but something fragile was returning. A kind of peace, born from shared exhaustion. Then one night, the final blow arrived. His lawyer called with trembling voice. Someone had leaked everything, not from inside his company, but from one of his oldest rivals. The empire would fall, but he could protect Amara if he acted fast. He looked at her across the room, her eyes wide with quiet fear, and he understood. This was the end. Not of them, but of the empire built on lies. "I'll take the blame," he said. "All of it." She tried to speak, but he stopped her with a touch. "You've carried my sins long enough. It's my turn." And for the first time, she wept openly. Not for what they were losing, but for what they had finally found. Truth. The storm came without warning. The morning Leonardo turned himself in, the sky above Manhattan was pale and bruised, the kind of light that looked too fragile for the world about to fall apart. He didn't wear a suit, just a dark coat, collar turned up against the wind. The driver waited at the curb, engine running. Amara stood by the doorway, her face hidden beneath a scarf, her hands trembling though she refused to show it. Neither of them said goodbye. They didn't need to. The silence between them was language enough, heavy, forgiving, eternal. He turned once before stepping into the car. The city lights caught her eyes. She wasn't crying anymore, just watching, as if memorizing the way he looked, not as the man who built an empire, but the man who finally chose to set it down. When the headlines broke, the world feasted. Vance Corporation collapses, they read. CEO faces federal charges. Cameras followed every step of his surrender. Anchors speculated, investors panicked, enemies celebrated. But behind the noise, in a quiet apartment on the Upper East Side, Amara sat by her window painting again. The canvas before her wasn't of towers or city skylines. It was of a sea, dark, endless, and forgiving. For months, she lived between memories. She visited him when she could, the concrete walls of the detention center smelling faintly of bleach and regret. Their conversations were brief, monitored, but real. For the first time, they spoke without masks. "I used to think silence was control," Leonardo said one afternoon. "But now I understand. It's what you give to someone when words aren't enough." Her hand pressed against the glass. "I never wanted to destroy you. I just wanted you to stop destroying yourself." He smiled then, the first true smile she'd seen in years. Time passed. Winter melted into spring. The scandal faded into other headlines. People moved on, as they always do. When Leonardo was finally released, the empire was gone. The penthouse sold, the cars, the company, all stripped away. What remained was a quiet apartment in Brooklyn, one he bought in her name, long before the fall. He came home without warning. No cameras, no press, just the sound of his shoes on the stairwell. She was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, humming softly to the radio. When she turned and saw him, she froze. The man before her wasn't the one who had left. His hair was shorter, his eyes clearer, his posture smaller somehow, humbled. "I didn't think you'd come back here," she whispered. "I didn't think I'd have anywhere else to go," he answered. The air between them was full of ghosts, but not the kind that haunted, the kind that taught. He reached into his pocket and placed a folded paper on the counter. It was a deed, the last property left untouched. "It's yours. Do whatever you want with it." She unfolded it slowly. "And you? I'm done owning things. I just want to earn peace." They stood in silence for a long time. Then she reached out and touched his face, the roughness of his unshaven jaw under her fingertips. "I kept your name," she said softly. "Not for what it was worth, but for what I hoped it could mean someday." And just like that, the walls they'd built between them began to fall. Not with drama or declarations, but with the quiet surrender of two people too tired to pretend anymore. Months later, they rebuilt something small, a studio in the old part of the city, where she painted and he helped manage the gallery that displayed her work. The crowds didn't know who they were, just a woman whose art carried the ache of love and loss, and a man who watched her from the doorway with quiet pride. They didn't speak much about the past. It lived in the brushstrokes, in the way he reached for her hand when no one was watching. One evening, as the sun fell behind the skyline, he found her standing on the roof, the wind in her hair. The city stretched below them, loud, alive, uncaring. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. "The silence," she said. He nodded. She turned to him with a faint smile.
"No."
"Because now I finally understand it." He stepped closer, their foreheads touching. The noise of the world faded away, and for a moment, it felt like everything they had lost had been returned, not in wealth or power, but in something simpler, love reborn, not as a promise, but as peace.